Hello everybody and welcome back to another CWL 2K update and a CMG ProDown rundown, all the things. We're just doing it all today. I'm IHOLDSHIFT. It's been a while since we have seen each other, and boy, I gotta tell you, a lot has happened. I'll do my best to get you all caught up on some of the major roster and organization moves, as well as where we currently stand with the pro points, and as we look forward to some of the more interesting big boy teams as we get into CWL Vegas. So first and foremost, welcome back. It's good to have you. Since we last talked, there were a lot of things that were going on with, of course, the CMG ProDown, OpTic Gaming being very dominant, 100 Thieves trying to catch up, and everybody else was just kind of behind that. Well, since then, Red Reserve and Reciprocity are both in the States, and all the big dogs would again play in a CMG ProDown for 2,500 bucks when there was a 2K tournament going on for the pro points. So all of the other teams that were not through the qualifiers, were not invited, will be playing in the CWL. I will give you a quick note, as we're about to go through the leaderboards very quickly here. After Vegas, I'll actually be tallying up all the individual players' pro points and keeping track of that. So we're actually going to be seeing a lot starker numbers as far as total points for these teams, and they'll also be a little bit more accurate as we take a look at who is where on these leaderboards. But let's start things back up with the Oceanic region, APAC. If you remember back from last time, Tainted Minds and Mindfreak would continue to be trading off of each other, 2-1 technically in the finals. And then there's a solid 3-4 of ARM and Obsidian, and some impressive moves from Venom, Vintage, and, well, what was the one-time Throne. I say one time because that team has split up. Beastin and Pred would be flipping over to a team called Rainbows that participated this last week. We have them listed as good team. And Restalling would actually be moving over to Vintage Black. Yes, there will be two Vintage teams to be looking at, as Obsidian would be picked up by Vintage and ARM has been picked up by Vertex. As you take a look at the standings as they currently are right now, Overdose as well as another team that was just outside the top 12 got picked up by Integral Nation. And Rapid also actually made a full roster change, picking up a lot of different free agents that have been playing well on different squads over the last couple of weeks. But this time it would actually be Mindfreak who do take the win off of Tainted Minds up top. The other two, as we mentioned, Obsidian, which is now Vintage, and ARM, which is now Vertex, would finish in the 3-4 spot. And there would be now a tie up top with Tainted and Mindfreaks. Over to EU, we look at what was previously there. And if you remember back, Heretics had been the upstarter, having won now 2 tournaments in a row. Movie Star Riders as well on the rise, and Team Sween was just kind of falling off a little bit, not looking nearly as strong as they were in the opening weeks when Reciprocity and Red were not really participating. Well, Red wasn't, Reciprocity was. A number of changes. You'll notice Cuddy Boys, they got picked up by the Imperial, and Insight and Company would actually find a nice little sponsor from Black Forest Games. Team 3G, which had been picked up after the last 2K, are now actually swapping orgs to Team Divine, and Fact Revolution would pick up Stanley teams. And then most notably, as we look at what's happening this next week with where our placements are, the #1 team out of the French qualifiers, they were named Bonsoir Paris, are now picked up by Overtime Esports. And then most interesting, Heretics would not win this week, but it wasn't just that they didn't win. They got routed by the #1 Italian team, Idomina, which absolutely dominated this week. They ran all the way through the bracket, beating a number of really great teams, and they would win the finals up there. So an interesting week of games going on. As you saw, Overtime, they finished in the 9 through 8 spot, as well as Fact Revolution, and then Idomina coming through and beating Heretics early on in the run of 16. Also Black Forest Games, and they would win a close one, 3-2 against Movie Star Riders. Now, as we go over to North America, we'll look at what the previous standings were in the 2Ks. Again, the big boys did not participate and would not again this week. Spacely's team ran away with the tournament last time, and Midnight had a bit of a surge, as well as Swarley and Company, their new team. So let's take a look at what happened this week. There were a number of things. Let's talk first and foremost changes, as you'll see them popping up in the 9 through 16 spot. There would be a number of newer orgs making go, Nemesis being one of them, which had a team that was mostly formed of a couple of, mid-tier players. J4L would also be involved. Disrupt Gaming has a new roster pickup with, again, some players that are sitting in the middle, as well as Rain NA. Morituri would actually pick up Miyagi and Company, so that's actually a pretty good pickup for them, as they had a really good showing. That is the #1 seed from North America, if I'm not mistaken, from their qualifiers, the play-ins, of course. And In Control Gaming would also finally make themselves in the top 16, up in the top 8. Revenge, which was Bracken Company previously, they got picked up by Revenge and the Orlando Reapers, most notably. Colchan, Mirix, and Zinx, and all the rest of the squad there. And then you're also looking at Reginald, which was actually Swarley and Company. That's the team and they were playing under. They got picked up by Regal Reserve, and they would find themselves in the top 8. But the top 4 this week, Midnight Esports again showing up and showing off. And then interestingly enough, Straight Rippin', which was which was Spacely's team, they got picked up by Straight Rippin'. They would actually lose to Sweet Young Chicken, and Accelerate Gaming would meet them in the finals, and it would not go Accelerate Gaming's way. It was a close one, though, a 3-2 scoreline there. So as you switch over to look at the new standings, again, you take a look at some of these newer teams. Most notably, you take a look at Phantom Squad, that Sweet Chicken team. They looked really, really good throughout the entirety of the 2K. Of course, a little bit of a hesitant finals, but they did look really strong throughout, and definitely a team to look out for in the future. So this is why you're here now. We're done with the 2K. We're back over to CMG, the Checkmate Gaming Showdown ProDown for $2,500. The biggest thing was the fact that most of what we would anticipate being our top teams were involved, including Red Reserve and Reciprocity from EU. And goodness, there were a lot of things to look at. So let's break it down and take a look at what happened where. You already see that Red Reserve, Reciprocity are in the States. Red Reserve having been here, I think, for a little bit, and Reciprocity just recently moving into their place in Vegas, of all places. And you take a look at some of the notable matches. FaZe is the first name that popped up to me, as they could not escape either EU team. Not exactly what you want of the FaZe boys. A 4-2 loss in the winner's bracket versus Red Reserve, and then you search over to the loser's bracket side of things, a 3-2 loss to Reciprocity. G2 was a kind of a surprise to start things off, as they would take a 4-3 versus Reciprocity before losing a 3-4 versus 100 Thieves, a very close game. And then you look at the losers bracket games, if you go back and look at it, they would only narrowly escape Evil Geniuses at a 3-2 scoreline, and then they would also actually lose out to the Pittsburgh Knights. That is Parasite's team getting picked up at a 1-3 scoreline. You're not going to see much from the Pittsburgh Knights in this notable teams list, but they had a really, really good showing, as they would have to, after a 2-4 loss versus Red Reserve in the first round, they would then go into the losers bracket, where they would 3-0 Midnight, 3-0 Splice, 3-1 G2, and then eventually lose again to Red Reserve at a 2-3 scoreline. So very close games. And then the other name that really popped out as far as teams that I was looking forward to seeing during pool play, that I thought would maybe make a run and maybe have a good showing, was Envy. They would actually lose 1-4 versus 100 Thieves after taking down Splice 4-1, and then they would lose again to Reciprocity at a scoreline of 1-3. But as you see it on the screen, OpTic would win once again, and they would take down 100 Thieves, which is our, again, repeat winners bracket matchup from last time. They would win up against 100 Thieves in the grand finals at a closer scoreline. It was 4-2, but you look at Red Reserve, you look at how close Reciprocity played a lot of the NA teams, and Red Reserve absolutely stomping through Reciprocity to 3-0 scoreline. Had a little bit of trouble with 100 Thieves. It was a best of 5 that went all the way to 5. 3-2 was the final, and it makes things really interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, here's kind of my synopsis. OpTic is still obviously the best team in the game at the moment, and the maps that they do lose are typically off of host, as most of them are now in Texas kind of boot camping. So you figured that once they get a bad host, things are kind of a little bit wonky. They still are playing the game mechanically and as a team at the highest level, I think, out of everybody there. But the gap that was once there after we saw it a couple weeks ago is very, very, very small. You take a look at some of these teams that we anticipate would do well, we had high hopes for going through, Splice being one of my picks that I was like, this team very well could be a sleeper since they don't stream. No one seems to really have a very good knowledge set of what their personalities are like. They could very well do something. They did not show up to play in this CMG. They got absolutely handled. Luminosity is another team that a lot of people have kind of been throwing a little bit of attention to, but they would again lose in the second losers bracket game after getting taken down by OpTic Gaming 4-1. They would lose to Reciprocity 3-2. And here's my other little key. And again, next time that we do a video here in the next couple of days, we'll be picking out some of the pool breakers, some of the bracket busters, I guess we'll call them. Some of those teams that they're probably sleeping on that you shouldn't be. You take a look at what Reciprocity has done so far in this CMG, and then you have to think back to the fact that Heretics smoked them. So is Heretics a potential? Is this EU scene that we're going to be seeing coming out of the open bracket and some of them in the play-ins going to be a force to be reckoned with? Very well could be, as it looks like North America is just continuing to beat each other up. Evil Geniuses, actually, they would actually have a pretty decent tournament. They would take one game off of OpTic in the first round before losing, and then they would actually take up the EU United kind of trainee class with Simp and Sellingham and all those guys. They would take them down 3-2 before losing to G2. 2-3. So maybe Evil Geniuses could potentially be back. There's a lot of things to look forward to. We'll kind of vote our predictions a little bit more about what's going to happen potentially in Vegas as we get this next video out. But I honestly think, just in short, it's going to come down to who shows up. I think OpTic has probably got the advantage on most teams, that they don't play mechanically well. I still think that as a team, they're playing above everybody else. But the gap is not nearly as wide as it once was, and the mechanical skill is very much so on the same level playing field for a lot of these teams, and a lot of the teamwork that we're starting to see, especially out of teams like Sweet Chicken, for instance, who we didn't see in the CMG but won the 2K. They looked great. Shout out to all those boys out there, Tish and all those guys. So that's all I got. It's been a long, it's been a lot of talking again, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed the recap. And if you guys did miss the 2K series, Joe Merck was streaming and casting with Benson. Both of them were streaming the semifinals and finals of the 2K. If you want to go back, check their VODs. They might still have them there if you want to get caught up. Otherwise, we'll be coming back later this week with a little bit of a dark horse and maybe sleeper pick selection going into Vegas. I've been Shift. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. And until next time, hope that you keep holding it down.